Hello, my name is Robert Nordland, and my company has been preparing reserve studies since 1986. Simply speaking, reserve studies help you outsmart disrepair at your property. It doesn't matter if that property is part of an association-governed community like a condominium or timeshare, or a city hall, a house of worship, a school, a retreat center, or a private club. It's a fact of life that the very moment construction is completed, every major building component begins a slow, steady, and predictable process of physical deterioration. The operative word is predictable, because reserve planning is all about minimizing your surprises. But what exactly does that mean, and why should you care? Well, first, let me take a moment to introduce myself so you can trust that I know what I'm talking about. By training and background, I'm a licensed professional engineer and a reserve specialist. My reserve specialist designation was earned in connection with the over 45,000 reserve studies we've prepared for residential, resort, municipal, worship, and other types of properties throughout the United States. Reserve studies are extremely important in the world of association-governed communities, where the long-term fate of a homeowner's investment is hitched to the wise decisions or foolish whims of a volunteer board of directors. As a result, most states require some form of reserve planning to maintain property values and reserve disclosures to protect home buyers. So whether it's called a capital replacement plan, a facility condition assessment, a property condition assessment, or a reserve study, the report you receive will have these three key results. The initial creation of the component list requires a diligent physical site inspection, while the remaining two results are based on calculations. The first key result is the component list, unique to each property. Because no two properties are ever exactly the same in terms of physical assets, physical condition, and upkeep, no two component lists will ever contain identical information. Although it's important to evaluate all the major physical components associated with a facility, wisely selecting which building components to include on the component list for reserve funding relies on a four-part test. Is the component a client maintenance responsibility? Does the component have a limited useful life? Does the component have a predictable remaining useful life? And finally, is the scope of the repair and replacement cost above the minimum threshold cost of significance? Each line item on the component list is documented in these ways, with a brief description, an estimate of the useful life measured in years, an estimate of the remaining useful life also measured in years, and an estimate of the current replacement cost measured in dollars. A typical component list would look like this, where the description and cost information define the scope of the repair and replacement project. In this example, you can see that sealing the asphalt at a cost of $8,000 is a significantly smaller scope of work than resurfacing the asphalt at a cost of $150,000. The useful life and remaining useful life information together is what defines the schedule of the repair and replacement projects. In this example, the asphalt will need to be both resurfaced and sealed in 2 years. But after that, the asphalt sealing occurs on a 5-year cycle, while the larger resurfacing project is not expected for another 20 years. The second key result of every reserve study is a calculation of reserve fund strength. It's a fact of life that buildings are always in a slow, steady, and predictable process of physical deterioration. Whether you know it or not, every major component will eventually reach the end of its useful life and will need to be repaired or replaced. If your organization is already in the habit of setting aside funds for future upkeep, that's great. But it's important to get an independent measure of exactly how well those funds have kept pace with actual and ongoing deterioration. If your organization has never addressed this issue, it's vitally important for you to discover the truth about where things stand or find out how far your property may have fallen behind. Reserve fund strength is a simple calculation that measures your preparedness. It's easy to figure out the numerator of this equation. It's the amount of funds, if any, that have already been set aside. The denominator requires a calculation to determine the fractional deterioration of each and every component, summed together and translated into a monetary value. 100% funded is ideal. That simply means the amount in your reserve fund is equal to the dollar value of deterioration. Properties with reserve funding at the 70% funded level or above generally have the funds to make repair and replacements in a timely manner. But most organizations, perhaps yours, have not set aside funds at a rate that's kept pace with ongoing deterioration. Operating on a reactive basis, such underfunded properties face significant physical and financial challenges. In addition to revealing the adequacy of a property's reserve fund, the measure of reserve fund strength also predicts the risk of not having enough money when needed. The third and final key result of every study is the funding plan itself. Remember, this is another calculation that is based entirely on the property's component list and reserve fund strength. In creating the funding plan for a property, we follow these four guiding principles: setting aside sufficient funds, setting the funds aside at a stable rate, fairly distributing contributions over all the responsible parties, and establishing a financially responsible approach. There's a comfortable margin of reserve contributions that fall into the category of just right for each property. This means an organization is responsibly offsetting their property's own unique rate of ongoing deterioration. The ideal scenario would be to have reserve funds accumulate steadily over time at the same rate as the dollar value of each year's physical deterioration. But since most properties are underfunded, stable contributions starting now may not accumulate fast enough to fully prepare for the cost of near-term repair and replacement projects. So it's likely that the funding plan may need an additional funding source, like a special assessment, loan, cash call, fundraiser, or capital campaign in order to catch up enough to prepare for the near-term major expense. Regardless, it's better to know now and maximize the time you have to prepare rather than ignore reality and be caught off guard in a few years. We believe that all the parties with a stake in the long-term physical and financial health of the property stand to benefit from knowing in advance what to expect and being financially prepared to afford it. No one likes avoidable surprises. No one benefits from deferred maintenance. No one likes being associated with a property in disrepair. And everyone loves saving money. Property management and maintenance staff in particular benefit when major repair and replacement projects are anticipated and scheduled at opportune times. No one wins when an air conditioning system fails in the heat of summer or a boiler needs to be replaced in the dead of winter. Having the funding in place to execute the project when needed avoids the time-consuming, expensive repairs that are required when you attempt to make something last longer than its intended useful life. And finally, everyone involved with the property's practical use benefits, be they homeowners, guests at a vacation ownership resort, government employees, congregations, students of all ages, retreat visitors, or private club members. Everyone enjoys the peace of mind that comes from attractive, clean, safe, and properly maintained facilities. I hope you've discovered how planning ahead with a reserve study can point you and your property towards a better future. To learn more, contact a reserve specialist in your area. Thank you.